Good morning, everyone. We're going to wait a few minutes to let some more people arrive before we kick off on this session. If you want to let us know in chat whereabouts you are in the world, that would be fantastic. We had some people from all over Canada with us on Friday and a presenter from Chile, which was very cool. The benefit of online events means that we have people from all over the world. And the UK, hello. The Irish contingent has begun to arrive. This is our first session of the day, so it's on quality of life and well-being and stress for autistic people. And then later on today, we have a session on mental health. So that kicks off at 2:30 and goes on till 5:15. And then the next day we have physical health and a look at sort of research and how it's changed in light of coronavirus, which will be really interesting. So working with sort of communities who are particularly impacted. And then on Wednesday we have education, and we have a webinar with the Turing Institute and Fujitsu on the research that they've been doing, which is really interesting. And then on Thursday, I'll be chairing another session that's on communication and language. And then we have our keynotes on Friday to close the whole thing. So we've got a busy old week ahead of us. Okay, I think I might kick off. There's enough of us here, I think, for us to be able to start some talking. So to let you guys know, if you want to ask questions of any of our panelists, there's a Q&A button just down the bottom or in the middle of the screen. So if you click that, we can look at your questions and ask them, and hopefully we'll ask as many as possible to our panelists. If you're on Twitter and you want to talk about the festival, our hashtag is hashtag #AutisticAFestival, which is quite long, I realized, but it's a nice way to communicate what you're learning and to just keep in touch with people who are also at the festival and share ideas. There's going to be lots of different ideas throughout the festival, but today as well, and you'll agree with some and you might not agree with all of them, which is absolutely fine, but try and be as respectful as possible, I suppose, when you are disagreeing with someone, whether it's in chat or through questions. Just remember that everyone is here because we want better lives for autistic people. There's going to be trigger warnings at the start of any talks that might have issues that you might find a bit challenging. So if there's something that you're not comfortable with, or you think that you maybe don't want to hear, just sort of feel free to go ahead and make yourself a cup of tea and take a break for that 15 minutes. That's absolutely fine. And then, yeah, this is a very relaxed event. As you can see, I have my dog in the background. We're all in each other's homes at the minute. So yeah, it's we're all multitasking. So we might have some occasional interruptions from dogs or children or spouses, and maybe some tech issues, but that's fine again, because we're amongst friends. So that's all right. So yeah, keep on chatting, keep on sending us your questions in the Q&A. So what I'm going to do now is hand over to Yorick Mall, who is my co-chair and co-pilot for this session, who is going to talk about his thoughts on quality of life.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me, everyone?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, fantastic. I am not going to improvise my way through this. I prepared something. It's like show and tell. It's only slightly more awkward. So here we go. It feels a bit weird to open a panel discussion about quality of life and having to make the case for autistic people deserving to have quality of life. Unfortunately, we do live in that world. Autistic adults' life expectancy is drastically reduced vis-a-vis our neurotypical peers. At birth, disparities even more pronounced. So for every autistic person here, welcome. You did amazingly considered how much the cards were stacked against you. For the rest of you, again, welcome. Thank you for being here. I hope Also, that this video will get shared after the fact and that it will reach people who don't think they'd ever met an autistic person before. Disparities, minority stress, and living in a world that just doesn't get you leaves a mark. We are kicked in the shins by life, not because we are lesser than, but because we're different. Our brain development went in a different direction than those of others. I'm currently writing this, recovering from 2 huge meltdowns in 48 hours and a hopefully minor depressive episode. I'm 32, 24 years after my diagnosis, and still learning how to take care of myself. Many of my blogs over the past few months focus on the struggle for productivity, which includes all of these topics. I'm going to share part of my blog from the 25th of April. I hated my autism for a long time, so I deliberately pushed away any idea of structure or consistency in my life. In recent years, though, I've started to appreciate how much consistency provides me. I write a day book. Here it is, a combination of food diary, journal, and checklist every day. It allows me to put the past in the past and be in the present. If I haven't written my day book, the last day doesn't quite feel finished. My days are structured between meals, daily exercise, daybook writing, maximum 1 hour of news consumption, learning languages, which is my special interest, regular contact with friends, and making sure my flat is clean and organized. The rest of my time is dependent on my energy reserves and whether it's a work day or a writing day. I used to include an hour of reading for pleasure and an hour of writing too, but since these are dependent on energy reserves, I took these out of my daily checklists. Now my partner is on a diet plan. He's back over there, connected to his exercise regime. I cook only once every few days and have meals at exactly the same time every day. Breakfast and lunch are identical every day, and I take my medication at the same time each day too. If I don't, I feel it the day after. This lifestyle would have disgusted me when I had not yet accepted my autism before I was 26, but like a nun, I'm a creature of habit. I'm here all week. These habits allow me greater control over my overall energy resources. I get energy from exercise, regular meals, communicating with my friends, cuddles with my partner, and engaging with my special interest. If I over-exercise, take on too much work, do not sleep sufficiently, eat too little or too much, get into complex interpersonal tangles, or simply get into bad misunderstandings with people, I deplete my energy resources immediately and get into meltdowns. Being under lockdown has been excellent for my energy resources. I sleep better, eat and exercise both less and more consistently, and have to mask less in front of neurotypicals. Far more than before, I've had my body and brain under control. I've been highly productive, both on more long-term projects and to strict deadlines. I thrive on deadlines. I can get a huge amount done in a few hours before a meeting, as long as I rest afterwards. Unfortunately, this week, the week of April 25th, I had a meltdown after a few days of consistent high-intensity work. This still happens to me and will happen for the rest of my life. Accepting that has been tricky. I used to count out my life in days since a meltdown, like an alcoholic battling to stay clean. But meltdowns are not a bad habit or an addiction. They're also not a mental health crisis. They are a natural response to being overwhelmed. I've had a long history of meltdowns. I get very frustrated with myself and rushes of anger with myself for having a meltdown in the first place. This is very confusing to others, but the only way to resolve it is for me to sit down in a quiet place, reduce sensory input, and allow me to cool off. I then get rushes of shame, but those do not last. When I had a meltdown this week, my partner got me down. I then had a full day of bed rest. I need a break from all mental and physical labor. When I melt down, that's my body saying enough, and it's been enough for a while. I switch between periods of hyperfocus and inertia with little in between. Like many autistic people, I'm a black-white, all-or-nothing kind of person, especially when I'm tired. The trouble is, like my feelings about my meltdowns, I love my hyperfocus and hate my inertia. When I feel inert, I usually don't do what I really should and curl up with a book or video game, but I fight it, desperately pushing for productivity when little ever gets out. This increases frustration and depletes my energy resources even further. The truth is, on my good days, I'm far more productive than an average worker. On bad days, I have nothing to give. The trick is to allow that productivity free rein, then provide periods of rest. This is, however, not an exact science. I'm known to snipe at myself not being back on form after a single day of rest. I'm going to have to accept, if I need more than one day, I need more than one day. As long as I use my time in a healthy way, use healthy coping mechanisms, and use my habits to my own benefit, I can get a lot done and be happy as a result. That was the blog. I'm currently working through moving my focus of self-value from productivity to that vague nothingy thing called self-esteem. I don't know if you know about it. The idea that I deserve to live simply because I do. Yeah, me neither. Not yet, anyway. Thankfully, I'm supported by my autistic partner, my autistic friends, and my therapist, who's actually trained on autism. Not an autistic therapist yet, but better than I've ever had before. I'm on my way. Thank you very much for listening.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much, Eric. That was really wonderful. I'm going to start by introducing our first speaker then. So we have Julia Cook, who is speaking on autistic camouflaging in an everyday social context, an interpersonal process recall study.
Let me just see if I can do this. Oh, no, I haven't. Yes, is that working? Okay, thank you. Okay, first time doing a Zoom presentation, so I'm just going to try my best. So I'm going to be talking to you today about one of the studies from my PhD, which is this study is in camouflaging in autistic adults. And just a little bit of a trigger warning. This is a qualitative study, and some of the experiences that participants talked about are distressing, and they've got to do with really negative past social experiences that they experienced. So if that's going to be really upsetting to you, I just want to let you know before I start. Okay, so camouflaging. It's attracting more and more attention in the research world, which is fantastic, right? Because we know that camouflaging is very common amongst the autistic community. We know that for many autistic adults, it's just a part of their everyday life. So they report camouflaging when interacting with work colleagues, friends, sometimes family members, mental health professionals, etc. And when we were designing this study, we were really trying to keep this in mind, and we wanted to examine what camouflaging is like during everyday social encounters. And so we had two aims then. The first was we wanted to identify the specific observable camouflaging behaviours that occur during everyday social situations. And then the second aim was we wanted to detail the processes that underlie these outward behaviours and really capture the experience of camouflaging. So in terms of participants, we had 17 autistic adults aged between 24 and 63. They all had IQs or estimated IQs above 70, and they reported to us that they engaged in camouflaging in their everyday lives. And the methodology that we used is that interpersonal process recall methodology. It's a bit of a mouthful. So IPR for short though, and that is a qualitative video-assisted recall interview approach. Now, IPR is a little bit different to the other more traditional qualitative methods, like qualitative interviews or questionnaires that have been used previously to ask people about camouflaging in a more general sense. Because what an IPR interview does is it starts by asking the participant to talk about how they camouflaged in a social interaction that they just took part in. And by re-immersing them in that social experience, we get these really specific, detailed and precise descriptions and information about camouflaging. So what that actually entailed was our participants came along and they completed a controlled social task, which was an introductory type conversation with a stranger who was our research assistant. And that social task is filmed. And then the participant completes the IPR interview. During the interview, the interviewer and the participant watch the film of the participant's social interaction, and the participant is asked to stop the video every time they see themselves engaging in camouflaging or thinking about engaging in camouflaging. And then we asked them questions to describe that behaviour to us. And then we follow their lead and ask questions about their thoughts and their feelings and their motivations and their past experience that have got really specifically to do with that camouflaging behaviour they've just showed us. So, for example, like, how did you learn to do that? When did you start using that behaviour? Things like that. We then used content analysis to categorise the observable camouflaging behaviours, and thematic analysis to deal with the process and experience of camouflaging. And it's the results of the thematic analysis that I'm going to run through with you today. So just a quick reminder. So the aim of this thematic analysis is really to detail the progression, the process, and the experience of camouflaging everyday social situations. And with that in mind, in the end, we generated these 4 themes that I'll run through with you now. So this first theme is called acceptance and connection, and it's really summarized by this first quote here. So, autistic people often genuinely want to make a connection, they just find it difficult. And so our participants were really talking to us about how they felt they needed to make a particular kind of impression in order to be valued and to be liked by other people. And for them, they said that they were trying to promote this social image of appearing neurotypical or conventional and trying to appear friendly and similar and nice, whilst at the same time trying to avoid the impression of being weird or strange or threatening. And it was really the participants' past experiences of being criticised and rejected and misunderstood that impacted the impressions they were trying to make and really shaped their behaviour in their current interactions. And what I mean by that is the participants had lots of experiences in which neurotypical social partners explicitly or implicitly associated their autistic behaviours with really negative social traits. So things like you're shifty, you're rude, you're sick. This is a quote of one of the things that the participants told us. So they said, "You're stupid, you're abnormal, or when you start to do this," so body rocking, "it's a sign that you're sick and something is wrong in your brain. And I've heard that from my own father when I was little." So a really, really powerful experience there of autistic behaviour being criticised. And you can see then how this lifetime of experiences that left our participants feeling really quite uncertain and anxious about their ability to successfully portray social images that they felt would lead other people to like them and to value them. So then for our participants, camouflaging was seen as a means to improve their social impression. And I've got a bit of a diagram, a very simple diagram here of the camouflaging process that our participants were describing to us. And so the camouflaging process was kind of twofold, to improve social impression, but also a lot of people felt that improving their social impression involved using camouflaging to help with neurodiverse communication, to help it make it more like effective for neurotypical people to understand them. And so just run you through this diagram here. So camouflaging involved adapting interpersonal behaviours and selectively disclosing personal information during social interactions. So that's what you think of as that observable kind of camouflaging output. And then participants also told us that it involved monitoring the social environment and monitoring their own social behaviours as well. And then we would hypothesize that this whole process might be enabled by alternative cognitive processes or routes. Now, something that is quite interesting to think about is that this camouflaging process is actually quite similar to the stigma management process or behaviours that is used by people who aren't autistic but have other concealable stigmatized identities. So things like a mental illness diagnosis or a particular sexual orientation. And there are some similarities here, right? So people with other concealable stigmas also manage stigma in their interactions by selectively disclosing personal information and, to a lesser extent, adapting interpersonal behaviours. So, for example, somebody might change their tone of voice or their gestures to try and conform to conventional gender norms. And people with other concealable stigmas also report using or monitoring their own performance and monitoring the social environment. But then we presume that they're not using those alternative cognitive routes to achieve this, and that we don't need to use stigma management to improve communication with neurotypical people. Our next theme is about the adverse in situ consequences of camouflaging that our participants reported. So specific components of the camouflaging process were identified as being difficult or taxing to perform during our experimental social task. And anxiety was common too. And during the experimental social task, it was often triggered by threats to participants' self-presentation goals. So, for example, if a participant thought that our research assistant might be misunderstanding them or perhaps judging them in some way, or if our participants felt unsure about what they should do or say. And paradoxically, camouflaging was described as also interfering with people's ability to fully engage and to communicate and to make certain desired impressions, and of limiting the authenticity, the closeness, and the intimacy of their social relationships. So this is a quote that I will read out to you. And this participant here is explaining how engaging in eye contact interferes with her capacity to process information and express herself. And then in turn, she was talking about how this could interfere with her ability to portray an impression of competence, say during like a work interview or like a job interview. And so she says, if I'm trying to make a good impression with you, I have two options. I carry on looking at you and then I have less brain function, and so I'll not be able to answer your question, or I'll have less ability to process what you are saying. If I look away, I can listen more and I can think more. And again, interestingly, these negative in situ consequences are similar to the negative in situ consequences found in stigma concealment literature outside the area of autism about the negative effects for people in a situation when they are trying to conceal stigma or manage their stigma. And then in our last theme, a lot of participants, or some participants, talked about having a diminishing desire to socialise anymore in accordance with neurotypical norms or to present a neurotypical identity. And for some participants, this meant engaging in more autistically or more authentically autistic social behaviour. So they said they were doing more overt autistic behaviours, explaining their social differences to people, and communicating their autistic social needs as well. And some participants associated this autistic socialising with decreased negative affect and increased positive affect. And this is articulated by one participant where she's explaining here her mental health, her mental health after a day when she's engaging in body rocking and stimming and things like that. And she says, it's making it beneficial for me, just going through the day and arriving at the end of the day and not being overwhelmed, because during the day I was relieving the pressure. And participants said it was both their own, but also others' awareness and acceptance of autism and diversity more broadly that was really important in facilitating the kind of environment where they could safely engage in autistic socialising, though. And just a couple of take-home messages from our findings then. And the first would be that the neurotypical majority's understanding and interpretation of autistic behaviour impacts upon autistic people and their beliefs about themselves and the social world, and then in turn, the manner in which they engage in the social world. and that programs that assist autistic people to socialize in more authentically autistic ways could improve their social experiences. But in order for autistic people to benefit from autistic socializing, their behaviors are going to need to be met with acceptance and understanding on the part of neurotypical social partners. And so any kind of program like this is really going to necessitate a systematic approach. And then I would just like to finish up by thanking our participants for their time, their effort, and their amazing insights, and also to my co-collaborators. So thank you very much.
Okay, Julia, thank you so much for your contribution. We'll have questions after all of the panel has spoken. So if you have any questions for her, you can type those in the Q&A tab on the Zoom link, or you can type them in the chat. But in the meantime, we're going to carry on and we're going to move forward to Catherine Crompton from the University of Edinburgh. And her research has been in supporting older autistic adults in residential care, focusing on identifying priority areas for research and practice. So, Catherine, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Just let me figure out how to share my screen. Okay. Okay, can you see my slides?
Yes.
Yes, great, perfect. Okay, thank you very much. Right, now I've got the technical bit over with. Thank you all so much for joining me today. I'm going to be talking about a piece of Autistica funded work that we have finished fairly recently that focuses on building our understanding of how to best support older autistic adults who are living in residential care. So I'd like to start with a brief introduction to our project team so that you know who I'm talking about when I say that we have done this work. So here's our team. Sue Fletcher-Watson and I are both psychologists and researchers at the University of Edinburgh. And Cos Michael and Michael Dawson are both autistic consultants who have a particular interest in autism in older age. So to give you a kind of very brief background to the work that we've done, as people get older, they may experience ill health and may require residential care. And we know that a lot of serious medical conditions are more common in autistic adults compared with non-autistic adults. So autistic people are around 5 times more likely than non-autistic people to have poor health, and this is especially so for older people. Now, these health conditions might impact on a person's ability to live independently, and while care and support at home should always be provided where possible, it may be the case that some autistic adults might need residential care in later life. And as I'm sure you all know, there's been very little work focusing specifically on understanding the needs and experiences of older autistic people. And as far as we can ascertain, there's really not been very much at all on older autistic people within residential care. We don't really know what their needs are, and we don't really know, therefore, if services are meeting their needs. And care homes can obviously play a very central role in quality of life. And so it's really important to identify what factors can contribute to good residential care for autistic older adults. So the aim of the work that we did was to identify priority topics for future research and practice development relating to residential care for older adults. So we know that we need more research in this area, and we wanted to help kind of kickstart some more research and to help researchers know where to start in this very under-researched area, and also to make sure that any future research kind of aligns with the things that autistic people and the people who are around them and who support them as they get older it's in line with their priorities and what they need and want. So the way that we did this is to bring together a group of experts, and we wanted to ensure that we had input from a range of people who have experience of or who are involved in residential care for older autistic adults, and bring them together to hear their views. And so we formed a kind of multi-expert group, and it included kind of representatives from each of these kind of categories, and some people who were both or who were in multiple categories. So we had some older autistic adults, siblings of older autistic adults, children of older autistic adults, researchers in autism and old age, clinicians in autism and older age, service providers from autism services, and residential care service providers for older care services. So it was a diverse group with a kind of range of different expertise and experiences, and all of our experts were either nominated or self-nominated. And we hosted 3 half-day summits with this group, where we used different types of collaborative activities to identify key topics and to explore how research and practice can address them in order to ensure that residential care for older autistic adults is meeting their needs. So the outcome of these 3 summits were that we identified 10 key topics for future research and policy development. And I'll spend the rest of my time today talking through these 10 topics, but we have recently published a paper that describes them in a lot more detail. So if you are interested and you would like to read more, you can find more detail in the paper. It's open access, so everyone should be able to download it and read it for free. So the first topic that we discussed as a priority is managing transitions into residential care. So moving from living at home to living within a residential care service. And for autistic adults, and perhaps particularly those who have lived independently, this transition is likely to be a very daunting prospect. And this can be further exacerbated when the transition occurs as a result of an acute health crisis, or in the absence of family support or other social support. And as a group, we reviewed some of the current tools and good practice guides that exist to facilitate transitions into residential care, and found that they don't meet the needs of autistic adults. And so the creation and evaluation of a new transitional tool is a kind of key topic for future research, as well as identifying the key factors that support a positive transition for older autistic people. So the second topic was autism training for residential care staff. So while most staff working within residential care will have received training on age-related conditions such as dementia, few are likely to have received autism training. And this is obviously very important for high quality care. And autism-specific training is essential to ensure that staff are able to recognise and support the needs of older autistic adults. And it needs to go beyond basic facts about autism and include information about how to support the well-being of autistic people within the context of living in a residential care service with other people. It should include things like the importance of hobbies and interests to well-being, autistic experiences and expressions of pain and anxiety, how to support transitions, and information about sensory processing differences. And training should, of course, be developed and delivered in collaboration with autistic people. Our third topic was recognising and respecting autistic difference. And there are lots of different ways, obviously, that this can manifest, but an example to kind of illustrate the point here is that residential care homes may encourage residents to engage in activities with others, but this might not always be either accessible or desirable for autistic people. So services should ensure that autistic people have the option and support to engage in activities and socialising when they want to, rather than assuming that social time is always beneficial. Also, for some autistic people, engaging in hobbies and interests can play a particularly important role in well-being, and it's important to make sure that they have the time, space and materials to pursue these interests too. The fourth topic is supporting physical health. Autistic people experience systemic barriers to healthcare throughout their life, and as old age is often a time of declining physical health, ensuring that autistic adults can access health services, including things like routine screening, is an essential part of residential care. So researchers might want to work on co-developing and evaluating tools that allow older autistic adults to monitor and communicate their symptoms to clinicians to facilitate a swift and accurate diagnosis. Our fifth topic is about the sensory environment and sensory processing. Autistic people can experience sensory stimuli differently to non-autistic people, and we don't really know that much about how the aging process can affect this. So how things like age-related changes in vision or hearing or postmenopausal changes, we don't really know that much about how this can affect autistic sensory processing. And so it's really important that future research explores these potential changes a bit more and explores the changes throughout the lifespan, because it does have a direct impact on how to provide the best support to autistic older adults, and perhaps especially those in residential care. So our sixth topic was autonomy and choice. So the ability to make choices and to have those choices respected is a critical part of living in residential care. And autistic people may find making decisions or communicating their choices difficult, but this should never be used to allow a loss of autonomy. So future research could investigate the usability of decision-making or communication aids with older autistic adults, and explore the possibility for adapting existing systems to be more usable for older autistic adults. Our seventh topic area is design principles. And what we mean by that is that the physical environment is really important for enhancing both people's functional capabilities and their well-being. So environmental intervention through careful design of residential care can reduce disabling aspects of the physical environment and have a powerful impact on day-to-day life. So future research could investigate which specific aspects of the residential care environment may be particularly disabling to autistic adults, as well as exploring what design lessons can be adapted from other work in this area. So including things like dementia care, best practice in residential care services. How does that interact with what autistic people need? Our eighth topic was about creating community and feeling belonging. So moving into residential care can result in a loss of community that people have built, and it might be particularly difficult for older autistic adults to develop a feeling of belonging within a residential care service, and perhaps even more so if the service is not well adapted to them. So residential care services need to be creative in their community building, and also be mindful that for integration into a community to be really kind of meaningful and to work well, this is also potentially going to involve offering support to residents and staff in how they interact with the autistic person, rather than just expecting the autistic person to kind of make sure that their behaviours align with the kind of neurotypical norm of the rest of the residential care service, and not putting all that burden on the autistic person. Our ninth topic related to advocacy. So transition to residential care might coincide with other important life decisions, such as making a will, and older autistic adults might benefit from an advocate, particularly one who is knowledgeable about autism. So researchers, practitioners, and community members could collaborate to develop a best practice model of advocacy for older autistic people, which could help them to make informed choices about who is involved in their decision making. And our final topic was regarding the evaluation of care quality. So in the UK, the quality of residential care homes is assessed by the Care Inspectorate and the Care Quality Commission, and they use quality indicator frameworks to assess how well a service is performing. We reviewed these frameworks within our multi-expert group and found that several key indicators of equitable care for autistic older people are not addressed by them. So future work could see policymakers working in partnership with autistic advocates and researchers to ensure that to investigate what the current experiences are of autistic people in residential care, and to ensure that the criteria are calibrated to ensure that support is meeting the needs of autistic people in residential care. So this has been a very kind of quick overview of the main areas identified by our multi-expert group. If you would like some more detail, you can find it in our paper, which, as I said, is open access. So that's the top. I don't know what I'm pointing at. There are no slides behind me. It's the top reference here. And I'd just like to note just now that we have also created an open access research tool, which is a multi-part interview that's designed to be used with older autistic adults in residential care to find out more about their experiences. So this is called the Autism Satisfaction with Care Holistic Interview, or the ASHI, and you can read about and download that to use if you'd like. So that's the second reference here. So the ASHI was created with an even wider group of community members and experts, and it includes a lot of the areas covered in this talk. We'd be very happy for it to be used by other research groups. And we're also very happy to talk to any research teams that are thinking about doing work in this area. You can find out more about all of our work in this area and our research on our website, which is the bottom link here. And I would just like to finish by saying a big thank you to you for listening. A thank you to all of the people who came along to all of our multi-expert group meetings, to our research team, and to Autistica for funding this work, and also for hosting an online conference and giving us the kind of space and time and opportunity to talk about our work, even when it can't be in person. It's really nice to be able to take part in this online. So thank you very much for organising that. Thank you.
Okay, Catherine, thank you very much. So questions for Catherine in the Q&A tabs, and she'll try to answer them during the Q&A after all of the talks are done. And in the meantime, we've got Elizabeth Weir, who will be speaking about lifestyles and daily habits of autistic versus non-autistic adults. And I think you're from the University of Cambridge, is that correct, Elizabeth?
Yeah, that's right, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Elizabeth Weir.
Okay, just gonna share my screen. Okay, thank you for that lovely introduction. Just as a quick warning, in the very beginning of my talk, I am going to be touching on some of the topics that Catherine talked about in regards to physical health disparities and also differences in mortality, and the fact that autistic individuals might die younger than other people. It's just the first slide, but just as a trigger warning for anybody that doesn't want to hear about that. So as I was just saying, unfortunately, we know that autistic individuals are at increased risk of premature mortality, and also that they have greater physical health risks compared to other people, including chronic health conditions like cardiovascular disease, diabetes, cancers, respiratory illnesses, things like that. And in particular, there is this increased risk of diabetes and obesity that we see among autistic adults. However, there's very little research that looks into the specific reasons as to why we're seeing this, and also very little research in people over the age of 35. Most of the literature focuses on younger adults if it includes adults in the sample. So in order to consider this, I created an online anonymous survey administered via the website Qualtrics. And I asked participants to disclose information about their demographics. We asked control participants to take the AQ10. We didn't end up using it for this analysis, but just wanted to mention that. And then we also asked people about their lifestyle choices and daily habits, as well as their personal medical history and family medical history. So it was quite a lengthy and intensive questionnaire, which spanned over 512 questions and over 150 medical conditions, but not everyone received every question. However, the lifestyle choices and questions I'll be talking about today, every participant was included in those. Every person saw those questions. So that's what I'm going to be focusing on my talk today. So for this study, we had just under 2,400 participants, which was really exciting. About half of them were autistic. And across both groups, we saw a really wide age range. So we had people between the ages of 16 and 90 that participated. And we had a mean age of 41, which was, again, really exciting to be able to look at a population of older autistic adults. We also had a heavily female respondent base, both for autistic and non-autistic participants. This was, again, really exciting for us because, as many of you may be aware, autistic females in particular are also a really understudied and underserved population in research. So we were happy to get the perspectives from autistic women. And as we were recruiting primarily through the UK, I'm located, as George said, at Cambridge, we had demographics that matched that. It was a primarily UK population and also primarily white. For the purposes of this, on the left-hand side, you'll see kind of this diagram of how we excluded people going down from the 3,600 that accessed it down to the 2,400 in the sample. Just note, most of those are from incomplete responses. So we really tried our best to include every perspective that we could in the survey. So give you a little bit more background on the lifestyle factors of autistic individuals and what we know. So there are no studies that currently look broadly at the lifestyle factors of autistic adults. We have some studies that look at children and some other studies that look individually at things like diet or sleep or exercise, but nothing that kind of describes holistically what the experience of autistic individuals might be and how that might affect kind of other aspects of their life. So in children, we see that there's restricted eating. There's also high rates of eating disorders. And also there's a diminished interest on participation in exercise. And that those patterns, particularly among exercise, seem to depend on biological sex. And there's also some indication that older children may be less interested in exercise. But we don't really have a lot of literature that looks across the lifespan, looking at what the experience of adults are. So that was a big reason that we wanted to do this study. We also looked at sleep disturbances and disorders. There is more literature in this area, but we still feel that particularly older autistic adults are not getting enough research in this area as well. So just for the statistical analysis, we did and for those that don't love stats, you could just tune out. But we did an unadjusted model, and then we also used binomial logistic regression. So all of the results that I'm going to be presenting in the next few slides control for things like age, biological sex, ethnicity, education level, and country of residence. So autistic individuals were significantly less likely to meet the minimal recommendations for exercise goals set out by organizations like the NIH, the NHS, the WHO. So we used pretty minimal requirements. So we talked about like they're 60% is likely to exercise at least once a week, and 60% is likely to meet exercise goals. Again, this, which is defined as 75 minutes of exercise per week. This is something that's sort of expected based on the literature that we see from children. So it's sort of an extension of that pattern. Similarly, for the dietary choices, we find that autistic individuals were significantly less likely to eat at least 5 servings of fruit or vegetables per day. Either, about every other day. That's what we asked. So that's 60% of people are likely to do that. But interestingly, they're also less likely to drink caffeinated beverages. We think that might be related perhaps to some of the sleep information that we're going to be talking about in regards to trying to maintain good sleep hygiene, or there might be other reasons for it. We also found that autistic individuals were more likely to eat high-calorie foods regularly, but there were no differences in the frequency of how often they drank water or how often they were drinking high-sugar beverages. In regards to dietary restrictions, again, we see an extension of the patterns that we see among autistic children. Autistic individuals were much more likely to have pretty much every dietary restriction we asked about. The only one that we didn't find a difference was for being soy-free, although we think we might have just been unable to detect it because of the sample size, because we do see a gap there as well. But yeah, individuals were much more likely to have every dietary restriction we asked about. And interestingly, they were also twice as likely to indicate, compared to others, that their dietary restriction was due to an allergy. So there's been a lot of really interesting work recently done both in children and adults that suggests that there might be overreactivity of the immune system, things like that. And that can certainly be another way that we're impacting on autistic individuals' diet, and that will have, further impacts on quality of life. In regards to sleep, again, autistic individuals were far more likely to report nearly every sleep disturbance we asked about. The only one that they were not was sleep talking. There was not a significant difference there, but they were more likely. The particular ones of note were frequent night terrors and narcolepsy, for which they were over 3 times as likely compared to others. And autistic individuals were also less likely to report sleeping at least 6 hours per night. And again, you can think about all of the knock-on effects that sleep has. We know it's so important for memory, executive function, for other things like metabolism, and other things like that. So the fact that a lot of autistic individuals are really struggling to have these really high rates of sleep disturbances suggests that we really need to be doing more for people to ensure that they can get high quality sleep. So we've also looked at differences in body mass index. So we found that autistic individuals were more likely to be both underweight or obese. We haven't looked specifically yet at the relationship between dietary restrictions and that, but we suspect heavily that that has an association there. And also they were less likely to be of a normal weight, though there were no differences in being overweight. So the implications of this primarily are that diet, exercise, and sleep patterns may have widespread effects on health outcomes. We think about things like diabetes, but it is clear that these can impact on all aspects of health, and reflecting back on the challenges that we're seeing among autistic individuals with chronic health conditions, it really, I think we need to be doing more to try and help support autistic individuals in identifying why we're kind of seeing these differences in diet, exercise, and sleep patterns, and what we can do to improve that. In addition to the health outcomes, you can also think about the impacts that this can have on quality of life in regards to education, employment, social involvement. A lot of those things are related to social involvement. A lot of times can center around food or exercise, different activities like that, but also maintaining education and employment. You can imagine how difficult that might be if you're having really disrupted sleep and not able to, engage as well as you might want to in those kinds of activities as a result. So some of the limitations of the study are that this certainly does not represent the entire autistic community. It only represents those who have internet access and the individuals that are physically and intellectually able to fill in a quite lengthy survey. We also know that our recruitment methods may mean that this is not representative of the whole population. For example, we know that because we recruited via Autistica's Discover Network, for example, also thank you Autistica for helping us with this study, and other databases and social media that, you know, asked people about an interest in autism, that our control group might include some individuals who have undiagnosed autism. So it's possible that this study might actually underestimate group differences. But excitingly, this is the largest study of autistic adults on this topic. It's the first to kind of holistically describe what the experience of autistic individuals is within this group or within these categories. And also it gives a lot more information specifically about the experience of autistic females. Also, you know, we weren't able to go into the great depth that some of the excellent qualitative research that's already been discussed here today, but we were proud that we were able to hear more about the specific experiences of autistic individuals in these areas, you know, get a richer sense of it than just medical records themselves can provide. So overall, autistic individuals are more likely to have a variety of differences in regards to exercise, diet, and dietary restrictions, as well as sleep quality and disturbances. I think the biggest thing is that we need to be working cooperatively. Researchers, physicians, and advocates really need to be working cooperatively to identify what we can better do to support autistic people in, you know, creating healthy habits in regards to diet, exercise, and sleep, which, you know, is in all likelihood not due to anything that they're doing, but just, you know, there might be biological reasons, for example, like that sleep disturbances might be happening. So what can we do to better support autistic people, and what kinds of factors are contributing to these differences? So thank you very much, and thank you if anybody on the call participated in the survey. We're really, really grateful for that, and also again for Autistica for hosting today, and also for helping us in our survey distribution.
Fantastic, thank you so much, Elizabeth. That was so interesting, and particularly I think in relation to the sleep part, for me it was very relatable. So that was really brilliant. Next up we have Simone Capp, who's going to be talking about relationships between autistic and ADHD traits and self-reported quality of life in young adults. So take it away, Simone.
Okay, I'm just going to get my screen shared and ready to go. So bear with me a second. So I think you should all be seeing my screen now.
That looks perfect.
Perfect. So hello everyone. I'd like to say a massive thanks to all the wonderful talks so far this morning, and for Autistica to giving me the opportunity to present. My name is Simone and I'm a second year PhD student at KCL, and as previously mentioned, today I'm going to talk to you about some of the work I've been involved in looking at young adult quality of life in relation to self-reported autistic and ADHD traits. Okay, so to start with an outline of some of the things that I'm going to talk to you about in the next 13 minutes. I'm going to start with an introduction to the overlap between autism and ADHD, and follow this up with an introduction of why I think there should be more work considering the experiences of young adults, and why it's particularly important that we should consider autism and ADHD together. I will then move on to give you a brief overview of the data that I've been working with, exploring this question and including the trait measures of autism and ADHD that we used. Then I'll move on to some of the results. I'll try and keep the statistics at a minimum for those of you that don't want that. And then finally, I'll provide a summary and discuss some of the limitations, and then finally where I hope to go from here. So within a diagnostic context, ADHD is characterized by high levels of inattention, hyperactivity, and impulsivity. And one of the interesting things is that autistic people may be more likely to have ADHD characteristics than the non-autistic population. In fact, it's been estimated that around 40 to 70% of autistic children and adolescents experience ADHD-related behaviours. There is some suggestion that this overlap might be lower in autistic adults, though. So now to move on to some research in this area. So for illustrative purposes, I examined the amount of published research which mentions autism and/or ADHD in different age groups to provide an illustration of where I think we need more research. This could be research considering autistic and ADHD traits, self-identification or diagnoses. So it's not an exact science here. But from this rudimentary graph, I think it's evident that the overwhelming majority of autism research still focuses on childhood and adolescence. Additionally, there's even less research that considered autism and ADHD together, despite the high levels of overlap. I would like to argue that we have a lot more to learn about the experiences of young adults, especially when considering ADHD and autism together. I'm particularly interested in young adulthood, as I think it's a really important transition period that's filled with many new challenges and opportunities for everyone. So, quality of life can be defined as an individual's perception in relation to their position in life in the context of the culture and value systems in which they live, and in relation to their goals, expectations, standards, and concerns. This is a fairly complex definition, but the overall message is that quality of life is subjective, multidimensional, and covers positive and negative aspects. I think research into quality of life is really important, as evidenced by the fact we've got a panel that's kind of dedicated to it today. Achieving good quality of life is a desirable outcome for everyone and should be something that we can all access. And in fact, quality of life may be a more relevant way to examine the impact of support compared to examining changes in core autism characteristics alone for autistic people. So in terms of some of the research already here, sadly, autistic adults often experience lower quality of life compared to their non-autistic peers. In addition, those with higher autistic traits across the population are more likely to report poorer quality of life. This is similar in research in ADHD, where adults with ADHD often report lower quality of life too. Given the lack of research in young adults, and in relation to autism and ADHD together, the aim of the present study is to examine how different domains of quality of life might be related to both autism and ADHD and their interaction in young adults. So the analyses that I'm going to talk to you about today have used data from the individual differences in EEG in young adults study, or IDEAS, and the social relationship study phase 3. These are both subsamples of a really large longitudinal sample of twins in England and Wales who were born between 1994 and 1996. This study is called the Twins Early Development Study. So for these analyses, I'll be using data from 473 participants who completed online questionnaires when they were between 20 and 25 years of age. These samples included individuals with high levels of autistic and ADHD traits, as well as many who had diagnoses or met diagnostic criteria. So all of the measures that I'm going to talk to you about today were completed online by the participants themselves using Qualtrics. The measures included the Social Responsiveness Scale 2 as a measure of autistic traits, and the Barkley Adult ADHD Rating Scale, a similar measure for ADHD traits. We also used the World Health Organization Quality of Life measure, the WHO-QoL-BREF, which breaks quality of life down into 4 different domains. For example, the physical domain includes questions on energy, pain, and sleep, and needs for medication. The psychological domain includes questions on positive and negative feelings, self-esteem, and cognitive abilities, whereas the social domain covers satisfaction with personal relationships or social support. And the environmental domain covers a range of items, including questions on financial resources, service availability, and opportunities for leisure activities. We also measured cognitive ability using an online version of the Raven standard progressive matrices. So to give you a little overview of some of the preliminary results, we used random intercept mixed effects models using Stata that were carried out because we're using a data sample with twins. Each quality of life domain was entered as the dependent variable in a separate model, and each of the analyses took into account the effects of sex, age, cognitive ability, autistic, ADHD traits, and their interaction. So to walk you through some of the results. Males reported significantly higher physical and psychological quality of life than the females in the sample. However, there were no significant differences based on this in the social and environmental domains. Age and cognitive ability showed no significant associations with self-reported quality of life in any of the domains. And as expected, those with higher autistic traits reported lower quality of life in all 4 areas. Whereas those with higher ADHD traits reported lower quality of life in the physical and psychological domains, but there were no significant differences in the social and environmental domains. So in terms of the interaction between autistic and ADHD traits, it looked like there might have been an association within the physical and psychological quality of life domains, but this didn't stand up to adjustments for multiple testing. So this should be acknowledged and may warrant further investigation. So to summarise, sadly, across all domains, self-reported quality of life was lower in the young adults with higher levels of traits. Trait ADHD levels were important in the physical and psychological quality of life domains, but not in the social and environmental quality of life domains. There was some evidence of an interaction between these 2 domains, but this didn't stand up to more rigorous statistical testing. So age and cognitive ability in this sample were not significantly related to any areas of self-reported quality of life. However, I should note, especially in terms of age, due to the restriction of range, i.e. our participants were aged 20 to 25 years old, we can't rule out that this might not be a genuine influencing factor across the lifespan. To me, these results are really important because they mean that future support to improve quality of life for autistic adults may need to consider the role of overlapping ADHD and vice versa. So we did include participants with broad ranges of self-reported traits, including those who would have met diagnostic criteria or reported a diagnosis. This study used trait measures instead of defined groups. This is useful to tell us about autistic and ADHD traits in general, but may not be as relevant to autistic people as if we compared groups of non-autistic and autistic adults. So further research may wish to examine this. So now moving on to some limitations with self-report measures. They're great for understanding how people feel about their own experiences. However, there are a few limitations that should be considered. Particularly that I want to highlight is that the use of self-report measures has excluded those with lower intellectual ability or other physical limitations from taking part. Therefore, the experience or perspectives of people across the whole spectrum of autism are not captured. Going forward, I would like to investigate how quality of life in these relationships may have been affected by COVID-19. So finally, I've got so many thanks that I don't have time for all of them right now, but there are so many people that have contributed in really important ways to this research and to me being here today. And thank you for listening.
That was fantastic, Simone. Thank you very much. And if you have any questions for Simone, make sure to add them to the Q&A and we'll ask them at the very end. Next up, we have Ned Redmore, who's looking at the phenomenology of everyday life within a day support service for autistic adults. So thank you, Ned.
Hello, yes. My name's Ned. I'm from the Open University, where I am looking at day service cultures. And to do this, I looked at the everyday life of a day service for autistic adults. So just before I proceed, as I conducted the research, I learned that the power relations of daily life within the day service were complex, often with those termed service users leading the way. Their lives and personalities are at the centre of the way it operates, and many have dedicated years of their life to making it is what it is, which is many more than most members of staff. This is a community connected in space in which people live. That is, live in a phenomenological sense, for they do not reside there, but they are people that share in the events of everyday life, present and part of one another's life worlds. And so for this reason, I adopt the term inhabitants to describe those that would otherwise be referred to as service users, it meaning one that occupies a particular place regularly, routinely, or for a period of time. So my aim was to explore service culture from the perspective of autistic adults with profound learning disabilities, as they are some of the most marginalised people within research, and specifically within service culture research, they are entirely excluded. And so I conducted the research over 2 stages. The first stage was designed to help me see day service life from the perspective of an autistic adult with profound learning disabilities. And so over the course of 3 months, I spent time with a young man called Ben, making notes relating to his communication, expressions, other people, environmental contexts, and so on. And also a support worker close to Ben participated as a co-researcher, utilising the same method. So during this first stage, I found that Ben's experiences of space and time were significant. And so in the second stage of the research, which is what I'll be talking about today, this orientated me to look at the spatial and temporal aspects of day service life through the phenomenological concept of place ballet, which put simply refers to place in which individual routines meet regularly in space and time. So to explore place ballet at the day service in this second section, I utilised a MAPS method. So on your screen, this is the map I used. This is the main area of the day service, which is called the hall. And so over 2 to 3 months again, I would go down at particular times of the day. And this is where inhabitants and support workers congregate, coming and going according to their individual schedules and pursuits. And so over 3 hours, I would fill in every 10 minutes, recording activity, movement and dialogue, anything that I could observe happening. And so as I discuss the findings today, I'll illustrate the themes using some of these maps, as well as some of the notes taken from my time with Ben. Just to illustrate a completed map, this is 10 minutes of activity in the hall. So as you can see, it's quite busy at times. So within the hall exists a space hierarchy. At the top are inhabitants that occupy personal areas. Below this are transient inhabitants, and at the bottom are support workers. So to take inhabitants with personal areas, these are spaces occupied by individual inhabitants. They experience the space as theirs, and this is also experienced as theirs by other inhabitants and support workers. This might constitute a particular area of seating, an area in which to move within, a table to sit at, a darkened room, or a tent. These areas are understood to be occupied in line with their connected inhabitants' day-to-day schedules. So while space in the hall is used freely as people come and go, people are aware of and respond to the incoming arrival of inhabitants with personal areas. So just to illustrate this last point, this is the bottom right-hand corner of the hall, and Ben is coming down from upstairs. It's around midday, and this is Ben's personal area in the bottom right-hand corner. And so as he enters the hall, a support worker, another inhabitant, get up out of his table and move elsewhere because they understand that it's his personal area. And this is just another example. This is earlier in the morning on a different occasion. Ben is arriving, but on this occasion, there's a support worker sitting in his seat, but this support worker is new to the hall, so they don't understand the spatial customs. So Ben, being the polite man that he is, he merely stands behind the support worker for a couple of minutes in silence until another support worker sees that this newer support worker is blocking Ben's personal area and gets them to move. So what this space hierarchy does, it provides ways of managing space with minimal effort. It gives the hall's people an expectation of their day-to-day boundaries and allows inhabitants to establish ways in which they and others can act within their space. This includes pacing in and out of the hall, singing, talking aloud, though to no one in particular, jumping on the spot, asking persons to repeat phrases, flicking gestures, hugging, clapping, skipping, and vocalizing. As these expressive acts are linked with the related areas and schedules of particular inhabitants, they become part of the day-to-day environment. So if the person jumping on the spot was absent on a Tuesday lunch, or the person walking and talking aloud could not be heard on a Monday morning, it may seem more noticeable than when they are there. This means that as inhabitants come and go, pursuing different interests and expressing themselves in different ways, there is no need to question or respond to it, as these are the accepted ways of acting, unique to the way that each inhabitant has defined their space. It provides comfort and rest to people's day-to-day proceedings. So just to illustrate this last point, in the top right-hand corner of this map, there is an inhabitant who is laying down across some chairs in his personal area, and just to the left of him, another inhabitant comes along and opens a cupboard, and a huge amount of Lego falls on the floor, and there's a huge crash, and two support workers come and start clearing it up, but the inhabitant laying down in their personal area doesn't flinch because they're safe and sound in their little across their chairs. So while the hall provides security and comfort for its inhabitants, for support workers, there is a consistent sense of risk that is maintained through frequent discussions of working practices. This first emanates out of inhabitants' risk assessments, which support workers must read before working with someone. So whether they understand it to be a valid assessment or not, support workers are presented with risk as an inevitable part of their role. As the hall is a busy space with numerous inhabitants coming and going, with support workers not knowing each individual person, it becomes a place of unknown risk that fluctuates in relation to which support workers and inhabitants are present. More experienced support workers are valued as they can define risk more acutely and in some cases disregard its existence. What the hall offers in this sense is a place for support workers to evaluate and share perceived risk. The effect of this is that risk becomes most emphasised for support workers leaving the hall with inhabitants as they pursue their interests and hobbies in local areas, such as when Ben goes to the gym. Support workers were observed communicating experiences of overwhelming crowds, judgmental public, aggression, ill health, and boredom as a result of leaving the hall. So in this way, although the hall cultivates risk in daily life, it also represents a place of security as its customs and practices are more predictable than life outside its walls. So day-to-day life in the hall can be characterised as a continual process of learning for its support workers, and this is facilitated through teaching from inhabitants as well as fellow support workers. So there's two methods of teaching. The first provides direction to support workers in their everyday roles and responsibilities. Support workers do this constantly with each other, seeking and providing information and advice on how to act and communicate towards inhabitants. But inhabitants are also prolific teachers, providing guiding instructions to support workers to help them proceed appropriately. For example, Ben would often take support workers' hands during art to show them how they should be applying paint, and he would also instruct them through verbalizations as to which activities were next on his schedule. Quite distinctly, he wears particular clothes on particular days, and in doing so embodies the temporal structure of the week so that support workers are aware of the schedule. So the second teaching method involves support workers sharing stories between each other about experiences, characters, lives and histories. This offers ways for support workers to work with inhabitants, but it also provides a personal connection to the people they share a space with. This approach is incongruent with the formal role of support workers and wider service provision, and these stories do not feature in official service documents such as support folders. However, the realities of social care means that staffing fluctuates, with support workers joining and leaving the team. And so storytelling helps to teach support workers about the inhabitants of the day service and the ways that they have shaped it. Inhabitants subsequently extend this community invitation, welcoming support workers through exchanges about blues music, idiosyncratic good morning customs, high fives, and ear tickling. These day-to-day customs bring together and maintain a community that exists in space through the shared lives of inhabitants and a transient support worker team. So just to summarise, finally, the findings from the hall suggest inhabitants have a big role in shaping the customs of day service life. This happens over the course of many years as they are able to appropriate space and define ways of acting that are appropriate to their interests, habits, and characters. This points to the importance of day service spaces in the context of autistic people with profound learning disabilities, as they represent places in which they can construct and experience communities that are congruous with their values and lifestyles. Thank you very much.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Ned. That was really interesting. If you all want to turn on your cameras and unmute yourselves, we can have a bit of a chat. Thank you all so much. That was so interesting and so varied, which was really brilliant. We've loads and loads of questions in. I'm sure we won't get to most of them, but one of the things I would love to start with is to find out what's brought you to the research that you're doing. Because I always think it's nice to kind of understand the researcher as well as the research a little bit. So I'm not sure if one of you in particular wants to start, or I can be teacher and pick one. Catherine.
So I think broadly speaking, I kind of fell into doing autism research. I did a psychology undergraduate, as a lot of people do, and then when I finished, I worked as a support worker within an outreach team for autistic adults, and I think I was just really struck by the kind of contrast between the kind of university teachings about autism, but also the research that was being done. It didn't feel like it married up at all with what people's experiences were in people's day-to-day life and what they were doing and their priorities and things like that. And that just kind of really struck me as a big contrast. And that's kind of when I got really interested in doing research that has a kind of direct impact on people's lives and can kind of improve day-to-day living for them. And so that's kind of how I got into doing autism research. My PhD was actually in aging research, so it wasn't anything to do with autism. And so it's been really nice that in this project that I talked about today, that I could kind of join those two things up as well, and do some research about older people and autistic people. So that's been really nice to be able to join those two things up and bring them together. So yes, that is how I became a researcher. Sorry, my brain is not working today at all. Thank you.
Juliet, you're next in line on my Zoom screen.
I think my interest in camouflaging in particular came really through my clinical work. So I'm a clinical psychologist, and I've worked in like autism specific therapy centers for my whole career, actually. Yeah, that's where I like to be. And I think, you know, one of the biggest like philosophy, I guess, of the clinics I've worked in is that we don't treat autism. We treat the things that people experience when they have to live in a world that has not been created for them, right? When you're the minority and all the problems that come from this. And one of the biggest problems that was facing my clients was camouflaging, and there was not much at that point, you know, information about it. And so I wanted to you know, research it and see how we can assist with this problem. So that's how I got into it.
Brilliant. And Simone, you're next over.
So really interesting question, and I was actually asked this by someone a couple of weeks ago, and it's something I've put a lot of thought into, and I don't think I've fully pinned down the answer. I think there are quite a few things that have led me here in a good way. So one of the main things is my mum has always worked with autistic children, adolescents and young adults in an education context. So it's always kind of been on my radar. I've had a number of close friends, and watching their experiences, sometimes quite heartbreaking, has really been really compelling. And this sense that it's not fair, the ways in which individuals might have to face this world that might discriminate against them. So I guess that's led into it as well. I was lucky enough to do a placement during my undergraduate psychology degree, where I met my current supervisors, Francesca Happe and Emma Colvert, and I would say they have completely inspired me, and I am completely overwhelmed. So this is kind of all of the many things that have added up to make me really want to be here, and yeah, be excited about trying to make a positive difference.
Brilliant. And Ned, what about yourself?
I was a support worker for about a decade in various different establishments, and I got to a point where I went to do a master's in autism, and then I was kind of like absolutely shocked at the exclusion of autistic people with learning disabilities and their kind of representation within research and culture and all sorts of variety of ways. So yeah, and then I sort of managed to get onto a PhD that was sort of exploring one aspect of their lives there.
Brilliant. Elizabeth.
Yeah, so I think my experience was quite similar to Simone's in that it was sort of the culmination of a lot of different things. So yeah, similar to her, I also had quite a few friends growing up that were autistic and had a lot of family friends with some quite difficult experiences in regards to, you know, just dealing with the discrimination that a lot of autistic people face. And I think also I actually did not do a psychology degree, I did a linguistics degree, but I did, as part of my final year, I did a course where I worked with a student on kind of their cognitive development and speaking skills over the course of, 15 weeks. And that really kind of got me interested in autism and really inspired me to do more research and learn more about kind of the experiences of people. And then my specific research area, I was actually originally going to do a much more focused topic area within physical health, and then really realized what a giant gap there is in the literature where we're just really not providing enough support or enough information to autistic adults And so then, you know, from there it was just following that.
Brilliant. And Yarrick, I don't want to steal all the time and asking my questions. So if you have any questions from
when did you start researching autism? Well, did I? It was kind of, you know, I was born with it. So can I just say thank you for every single one of these talks. They've been absolutely amazing and they've been enlightening. I want to go all the way back to the start of today, when you were speaking, specifically, Julia, about camouflaging, which was absolutely fascinating. And you did speak about the emotional wariness of what it does to be minoritized, and specifically to stop showing autistic traits. And this is something that Catherine was talking about as well. So I'm kind of asking it to both of you. Is there a specific way that autistic people are seen to break the rules, are seen as uncanny because of who we are and what we do? Is there, to be from the other side, from the neurotypical perspective, is there a way in which autistic behavior is seen as in a specific, okay, right, I'm going to reformulate that. In what way do autistic people offend neurotypical sense of normality? What way can we sort of,
yes, very like interesting question, right? And I think the thing for me, right, is so I'm interviewing autistic people, and so I guess a lot of their experiences from the group that I had, and, you know, really sort of like deep diving into their experiences, was there did seem to be this this feedback, that there's lots of experiences of criticism, of rejection, about overtly autistic behaviors, and these neurotypical people just associating things with negative social traits. So like, that's rude not to look at me, or, you know, criticizing, and it is really about the difference. I think is what my participants were saying, is that a lot of, you know, I would act in these autistic ways, which a lot of people didn't know at the time were autistic ways. So just doing things, and people were telling me that's wrong, that's not the way. And I think it's about it diverging from people's experience. And when it's not socializing the way that I like to socialize, like neurotypical people saying it's not socializing the way I want to socialize, therefore it's wrong. Mm-hmm. Instead of going, it's different. No, it's just wrong, because it's not my social preference. And neurotypical people not understanding that those social preferences are just that, social preferences, not social laws. They're their preferences. And instead of being able to say, hey, my preference is, like, when I'm explaining information to you, if you nod, or if you give me some non-verbal feedback, I know you understand. And so I'm having difficulty right now knowing if you're understanding me. And the autistic person can say, oh, I'm understanding you completely, but I don't do those non-verbal things. And then we can go, oh, okay, no problems. Now I know you don't do them. I don't need to rely on them. I might ask you some questions every now and then to say, are you understanding? So it's like, non-autistic people, we don't understand that we have social preferences. We think that's just socializing. I think that's what, yeah.
This is what it is, which is further explains the double empathy problem. I want to, thank you very much. I want to focus on you and also spread this out a little bit to the other panelists. I want to speak specifically about other forms of identities which intersect with autism, neurodiversity, race, gender expression, sexuality, and class. So, as this is an all-white panel, how can we, have you seen any disparities or intensifying negative quality of life for autistic people of color, for instance, who are a group that are widely under research? When I do trainings, I always say that I've had public meltdowns. I had a public meltdown when I lived in East London when I was 18 stone, and I'm 6'4". So there was a lot of trouble to be had. People were like, okay. And I was banging my head on the ground outside a tube station, and I was told just to calm down and go home and rest. Whereas if I'd been black, I would have had a bullet in the head. This is a huge problem. How are you trying to diversify your evidence base?
Yeah, I think it's really important. I think we, as a field, you know, if we're for neurodiversity, then we also just need to be for diversity in general. And you know, generally we're not doing the greatest job of diversifying our participant samples, of taking this intersectionality in terms of autism and other minority cultures. And I think we need to really think about the way that we are going about recruiting things and making people feel included in the research process. And we need to understand that we need to reach out to communities that feel, and rightly so, like ostracized from being parts of these conversations. And it's up, you know, it's up to us to make this space inclusive for people with you know, of different races, of different cultures, of different sexualities as well. And it's up to us to make it inclusive. People shouldn't have to reach out to us. We need to do it the other way.
Simone, because you've been focusing on quality of life, have you found disparities when it comes to, say, race?
I haven't got all of that. I think I might have some of that data somewhere. So they're data sets that I've not collected myself, but definitely in light of your question and in light of everything that's been going on, I think that's really important. So I think I might dig down a little bit more. So maybe watch this space. But I've got a new upcoming study and we're taking some measures like that. And it might be really interesting to see what sort of disparities might come up.
Catherine, did you want to say something on that?
I think I just wanted to say that it's such an important question, and it's a great question, and it's a question that can cause a lot of discomfort for people. But I think that we're not going to make any progress if we just want to feel comfortable all the time. I think particularly in relation to the work that I was talking about today and thinking about how to make these services that are like, they're such a big part of people's lives. If you're transitioning into a residential care service, that's where you are for, you know, most of your day and week. And so it needs to be right for every individual, and that takes into account every facet of their identity. And I think, well, I know there's been some work done on residential care and LGBT elders, which is really, really interesting. And I think that we need to be reaching out to these researchers that are doing these work and are doing this work, and, you know, working hand in hand with them. There's no point in trying to do stuff that other people have done, but we need to, you know, remember that everybody has so many different facets of their identity that can really impact how they engage with a service, whether that's you know, based on race or LGBT status or anything like that. We need to really be considering all of the different things that make a person, and that's how we'll make services that fit them.
And just going back to the questions that we had in from the community, someone was wondering if you think there might be a shift from residential care to try and focus on care at home, particularly in light of COVID-19 and that, whether that might be something that could impact.
Yeah, absolutely. So like I said, I think that care at home is everyone's first preference, and that should always be, you know, followed as the kind of first and main choice for most people, because most people do want to live where they have always lived and have the things around them that they've always had around them. And really, residential care for most people is an absolute kind of last choice, I guess, but that doesn't mean that if it does come to that stage that it shouldn't be the best possible care that it can be. And I think that residential care can be great, and there are many services that do provide good care for people, but it's making sure that it's good care for autistic people too. And that's really kind of what's missing at the moment, is we don't have the frameworks, we don't have the research, we don't have the guidance, and we kind of need it. Just even, you know, if there's one autistic person in residential care, that we still need it. It's still important, it's still a priority, and we should still be trying to get it right for everyone.
Can I kind of slightly unpick that just very quickly, Catherine, regarding residential care? So you're talking here about older adults who are at an age where they would be in residential, where they could be in residential care anyway? Or are we talking about younger people or younger adults who might be living independently instead and living in residential care because they have the special needs that need to be accounted for?
Oh, I see. So when we were doing this piece of work, we were specifically interested in older autistic adults who were transitioning into residential care in old age. So for the kind of point of reference that we used, God, I can't remember, it was either 60 plus or 65 plus, which is still at the kind of younger age range. But we were very much focused on people who were transitioning as an older adult rather than someone who was living in residential care as a younger or middle-aged person, because I think they have quite a unique set of needs.
And Elizabeth, we had a really interesting question for you that I think captures kind of one of the joys and challenges of working with our community. Do you think that there's a possibility that autistic individuals are more likely to answer accurately in relation to exercise and dieting than non-autistic people? Might non-autistic people kind of fudge the details a little bit on what they've been doing?
Yeah, no, I certainly think that's likely. Is probably that some of the differences are based on, you know, being more accurate and honest, perhaps, about kind of the experiences that we're seeing than perhaps non-autistic individuals might be. But the one thing I would say is I do think both from anecdotal evidence and qualitative studies that have been done with autistic adults, as well as studies in children, it does still seem that these kind of differences or disparities, for example, when we think about sleep disturbances, that they are really something that exist in the lives of autistic people differently than they do for others. And, you know, when you think about like the studies of children, those are primarily parent report. So parent report from an autistic child versus a non-autistic child. So I think when we're seeing these kind of persistent patterns that are happening at all stages, when you're looking at childhood, adolescence, adulthood, it's something that we do need to take seriously. But yeah, I can't discount the possibility that so, you know, some of this difference we might see could be attributed to people just being a bit more, you know, forthright.
Yes.
We had one that was for everyone. Let me just find it. What are your opinions / views on autistic researchers disclosing their diagnosis if they're comfortable to participants, and do you think there are sort of positives and negatives to it? That might be a difficult, I mean, I suppose as having been a researcher who is autistic, I found that it really opened up the conversation massively, because I think there's sort of often kind of a wariness with researchers from the perspective of autistic people. But if someone knows that you understand their experiences and there's sort of that shorthand of understanding what life is like as an autistic person, I found that very much sort of opened up the conversation and sort of meant that we were sort of a few leaps ahead in terms of building a bond, working together.
When I get asked that question from autistic people or from parents or from people I'm helping train, it's always about, well, is it safe for you to come out? It's the same, like, I liken autism to kind of be to the state of being trans. I'm not trans myself, but when it comes to existing as trans, you need several things to happen with the world around you in order to be healthy. You might need medical interventions. You might need help transitioning. You might need psychological support. You might need medication. And with autism, it's a similar thing. It's just something about you that you are, and that you need help with changing. It's different to just being queer or being lesbian or gay, which doesn't necessarily rely on you accessing medical support, but when it comes to being trans, many people do. And when it comes to disclosing that you're autistic, I tend to do that because I have the privilege to, Like when people of color, we've talked about this before, may have less privilege in doing that. People with learning disabilities might have less privilege in doing that as well. So when people who already have the privilege of appearing less harmful by other people, then we should take that. But I don't know if other people here in the chat are autistic themselves, who are researchers.
Well, and I don't think people need to disclose that, you know.
Okay, that's ironically. No, we shouldn't talk about that. No, not on the chat. I mean, in the...
Oh, yes, sorry. No doubt. I would
the
hope
researchers.
that there are some autistic researchers who've joined us.
Yeah. Okay. I want to focus on Elizabeth. Have you personally, I have had a long time standing issue with vomiting, which initially was diagnosed as an eating problem, and later had seemed to have more to do with having something wrong gastrointestinally, and it seemed that had not been the case. Are there any other eating or sleeping issues or problems that are pretty much non-existent in the neurotypical community, but are present with autistics?
So my study, I think, probably doesn't have the capacity, perhaps, to answer that question, unfortunately, in that, you know, we were primarily asking people about specific dietary restrictions and other things like that. In the health section of the survey, we did provide space for people. So we had like a list of all the common, for example, gastrointestinal conditions, right, that you might see in the general population. And then we had a number of people sort of write in their own experiences. And across all the categories, we did see higher than expected rates of really rare conditions, right? Some that have not related to gastrointestinal, perhaps, but like things like Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and lots of autoimmune conditions, things like that. So it seems that there are a range of certain conditions also related to gastrointestinal that might be much more prevalent among autistic people than non-autistic people. But I think probably I would hope that we can do future research that asks autistic people about their experiences and tries to identify, you know, experiences just like the one that you talked about in greater depth, because, you know, my study probably just covers more the categories that we've already established rather than creating new ones, unfortunately. But thank you, because I really think we need to be doing that kind of research and talking to people, you know.
I'm seeing from the chat that we have plenty of autistic researchers and academics joining us, which I'm delighted to see. It's brilliant. We are probably coming towards the end of our chat, unfortunately, so there are definitely lots of questions that we haven't had a chance to cover. I would love to ask you all individually where people can find your work, if you have websites or if you're on Twitter or anything like that, that would be brilliant. And then also what you're doing next. So Ned, we will start with you.
Yes, I am on Twitter. I think I'm at Plotinus Poe, or just my name, Ned Redmore. And I have an Open University profile as well with, I think it's got, I've got a couple of publications or something like that, and a ResearchGate one. I'm just coming to the end of my PhD, so I'm trying to write it, I suppose, and there will hopefully be some more publications coming from it soon.
Brilliant. Thank you for being here while you're writing it as well, because yeah, it's hard. It's a difficult time, so thank you. Simone, what about yourself?
So I'm still doing my PhD, and you can definitely find my profile on the King's website. I am barely social media literate, but I am on Twitter, just about. I find LinkedIn a little bit less scary. So I'm currently in my second year, and I'm going to be collecting some more data myself, looking at how quality of life might have changed because of COVID, and whether there's anything autistic people feel that's been really useful to help them during this time, and actually whether there's anything positive that we might have learned because of COVID and anything that might help everyone going forward. So that's how to contact me and how to find out what I might be doing going forward.
Brilliant. And Julia?
I am on Twitter at Dr. Julia Cook, probably experiencing clinical levels of Twitter anxiety, but trying to get better with using Twitter. And yeah, so I'm continuing the PhD. I'm right in the middle of it, so continuing to look at camouflaging over time, and we're trying to expand now and look at the ways that autistic people are doing other social coping apart from camouflaging as well.
Brilliant. And Elizabeth?
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter at eweir21. And also I have a couple articles that you can find that I've written up with my supervisors for the magazine Prescriber, and those are specifically aimed at GPs in order to try and better educate them about autism, both in adults and children. So feel free to pass those along to your GPs as well. And then I've got some papers that should be coming out in the next couple months, and I'll be posting those to Twitter as well. And then what I'm working on now is we're actually still recruiting for a study. So if anybody's interested in participating, we're looking at healthcare experiences of autistic individuals. So looking at issues of anxiety, sensory issues, access, as well as meltdowns and shutdowns, lots of things covered by the survey. So we'd really appreciate your participation in that.
Brilliant. And will people find that through Twitter?
Yep, yeah, it's on my Twitter, and I can also post it again.
And then Catherine?
Hi. I just wanted to say, because my internet froze slightly when Yorick asked the question before, and I think I kind of just wanted to answer it very quickly, and also preface it by saying that I am a neurotypical person, as far as I know, a neurotypical person, and so my answer comes with that kind of caveat and also kind of level of privilege about not having to disclose anything to people. But I think that kind of generally in research, and not just autism research, if people are comfortable to disclose that they're autistic, I think it's a really good thing to do. I think it can allow the autistic researcher to be more comfortable and to behave as they would like to behave, and to not necessarily feel like they have to mask, which, as we've talked about, can be really kind of a difficult and problematic thing. I think it's a possibly really good opportunity to improve other people's understanding of autism. If you're going in to take part in any kind of study and the research says I am autistic, and the person hasn't met an autistic person before, that's a really great opportunity to kind of open that door and open their eyes to what autistic people can be and what they can do, and the kind of many different autistic people. I'm not wording this well, but you know what I mean. And also, I think particularly for research with children, I think having space and creating that opportunity for children to see autistic adults thriving in a job that they like, doing work that is important to them, I think is a really, really important and can be really powerful for people. So I think that if people are comfortable and happy to do it, then I think it's a really good thing. Anyway, sorry, what am I doing? Okay, I'm on Twitter. I am at CJ Crompton. You can find all of our research, all of our outputs and papers and stuff on dart.ed.act.uk/research, I think. And what am I doing next? I'm doing some work about peer support, and peer support particularly in schools for neurodivergent young people in secondary school, and also some work about post-diagnostic peer support for adults who are diagnosed with autism in adulthood. And so that's what I'm doing next.
Brilliant. And Yorick, I know people were wondering about your blog. Where do people find your blog?
My website is www.yorikmol.com. That's JORIKMOL.com. If you have questions for me, if you want me to speak anywhere, I've just recently started it up. I'm not an academic, I'm not a researcher, I'm one of those people you've heard about, I'm a human, so I do not have a PhD. So yeah, I'm very interested in hearing from you, and I'm just going to make some soup later, so that's what I'm going to do, and hopefully manage to finish a draft of my book that I wanted to have finished 2 years ago, but autism activism got in the way. So hopefully that'll be finished at some point.
Brilliant. Well,
And
thank you all.
Who are you? Who are you? Who are you? What are you doing?
Thank you all so much for letting us into your homes and telling us about your work. It's been so fascinating today, and I really appreciate getting to meet you all and chat to you all. And thank you everyone who's joined us for the conversation. And we've had loads of chat and lots of questions, so I really appreciate that. And we're back at 2:30 to be talking about mental health. Bethan is going to be chairing that one, which will be brilliant. So yeah, again, thank you all so much and take care.